Jeff Pearlman is an author, New York Times bestseller. He's written some great sports books and has done some interviews that also have opened the eyes of many people who follow sports, cover sports, or like sports. And he now joins us today on 365 Sports on his book about Bo Jackson. Jeff Pearlman will join us on Skype today on 365 Sports. The book is called The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson. And Jeff, thanks for your time on 365 Sports. So he has been retired for a long, long time. When did this book kind of come into your head?
I guess about 3 years ago when I was sort of thinking about the next book. I started thinking about being a kid growing up in small town New York and what posters were on my wall and what were the athletes who really captured my imagination. And I'd say Bo Jackson was very high on that list, poster-wise and imagination-wise. And I'm very nostalgic, probably like you guys are about sports. It takes you back to places. It makes you feel certain things. So I just really was into the idea of diving back into my childhood.
Jeff, I was obsessed with Bo Jackson when I was younger. In 1991, when he got signed by the White Sox, we were living in Fort Myers, Florida. We drove up to Sarasota to see him play minor league baseball. I made my dad take me back a day after a rainout so that I could see him play baseball with his new hip and all that. But the way that you frame this as a folk hero and Paul Bunyan, and a lot of the stories you hear about Bo are Davy Crockett-esque stories. When you got into researching that and going into Alabama and talking to these people, did you really feel like you were talking about a guy who didn't really exist?
I love the Davy Crockett usage. So far I've heard Davy Crockett, Paul Bunyan, John Henry, and Zeus are the main. And it's weird. Like, there's this story that's been, was told to me early on that when he was playing at McAdory High School in Alabama, he played a game where he hit a ball so high that by the time it came down in left field, he was rounding third base. And, you hear that kind of story and you think, well, that doesn't make sense. That's ridiculous. That's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And then you talk to more people and they say, no, that happened. Talk to more people and they say that happened. And then I tracked down Eddie Scott, the guy who was playing left field for Fairfield High School. And he's like, yep, that happened. I was in left field. I've never seen a ball hit that high. By the time it came down, I look up, I grab the ball, look up, Bo was rounding third. So, yeah, it's like Paul Bunyan if Paul Bunyan were real. I mean, it's crazy.
Jeff, what was a young Bo like before becoming the guy that would become the folk hero, the legendary figure that can do things that not many people can do? Where did this all sort of start when you started researching this?
I mean, it started in Bessemer, Alabama. Poor, kid had a stutter, severe stutter, was held back in school, very young in elementary school. One of 10 kids living under a roof in a 3-room house, single mom. His dad was named A.D. Adams. He had Bo while he was married to another woman, lived across town with his other family, had very little to do with Bo. Bo would wear his sister's hand-me-down shoes to school or just socks if he didn't have shoes. Really poor, like really, really poor. And an athletically gifted kid who, it's kind of funny, like you don't see it anymore this way because none of our kids play a million sports or just run around the neighborhood with their friends. They're on their phones. But he was a kid who was like throwing crab apples with his friends, throwing rocks with his friends, jumping over ditches, jumping over fences. And he really developed as an athlete just by living a kid's life in the most sort of typical yet atypical way.
Part of this, and I saw today also on SI.com the story with Bo Jackson, the Bucks, Tampa Bay, were once handed a unicorn running back, and here's how they blew it. And the background story about he was, playing baseball, he had a flight, he didn't pay for it, and Auburn got nervous, is that correct? And then it traces back, does it trace back to Hugh Culverhouse, the owner of Tampa Bay?
Yeah, it's such garbage in hindsight. So basically, he was playing baseball at Auburn. It was his senior year. He was done with football. He loved baseball. And Buccaneers say, we want to fly you in because we're about to have the number 1 pick. We'd like to give you a physical. So Bo had an agent, which you weren't supposed to have, but he had an agent, and he dealt with the Bucs, and the Bucs sent a plane for him and flew him. And Hal Baird was the Auburn baseball coach. And before game, he's like, where's Bo? And another player's like, he's in Tampa. They flew him there. The Bucs flew him there. Hal Baird's like, they did what? And they had to, Hal Baird and Pat Dye, the football coach, who was also the AD, reported it to the SEC. And here's why it's such garbage. Like the SEC said he's ineligible. He can't play baseball anymore. Like the worst kept secret in college sports was that pretty much every SEC team was paying players one way or another. You know, like it would not shock any of you guys to know that most of the players in the SEC in the 1980s were getting money, cash payouts. But him taking a plane ride from the Buccaneers that, you know, had to kill his eligibility. So that happens. He blames his agent, who no longer was representing him, and he blamed the Bucs and thought they were doing it deliberately to screw with him. So that led him to a very open-minded idea of playing baseball, and the Royals used a 4th-round pick on him, and the rest is history. He never played for the Buccaneers.
Jeff, I remember his book when it came out, Bono's Boat, that he wrote with Dick Schaap years ago. And I'm sure as you read that, I'm sure a couple different times to get what his perspective was 30 years ago, writing that, opposed to what his perspective is now. I remember him thinking that, and I'm not sure that Hugh Culverhouse wasn't a racist, but Hugh Culverhouse was a racist and that he wanted him as some sort of mascot and all these things. Does he still feel that way? And did he ever amend how he felt about the Bucs, or is that still how that all went down?
I don't think he gives a crap now in 2022. Yeah. I don't think he harbors anything. Hugh Culverhouse is long dead. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he hated the Buccaneers. Like he truly blamed them, thought that they were deliberately trying to get him to lose his baseball eligibility so he wouldn't have a baseball option. It's really warped. I honestly think it was mainly a miscommunication, because why would the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they had the number 1 pick. They secured it. Why would you deliberately piss off the guy who's going to come to you? It doesn't make any sense in logic standpoint. But he never let that go, ever let that go. Hated the Buccaneers. There's a time the Buccaneers wind up drafting him number 1 anyway, against all logic and reason. They thought they could buy him and have him come. And Bo's agents convinced him to go to Tampa Bay, meet with the press, meet with the Bucs. And Steve Young, who was a quarterback on the Bucs at the time, told me a story. Hugh Culverhouse and Steve Young took Bo out for dinner. And Culverhouse said, all right, I'm going to leave you two alone. And he wanted Steve Young to work the sales on Bo Jackson. Culverhouse leaves the table, and Bo leans into Steve and says, listen, man, just so you know, there's no effing way I'm ever playing for this team. And Steve Young's like, okay, then I guess my job here is done. And he never played for the Bucs.
I'm just sitting here thinking about how much NIL money Bo could have scored in today's man alive.
How about that? Wait, 2 things. He would have been making $5 million, $10 million a year. And if he played with the Buccaneers, their backfield would have been Steve Young at quarterback and Bo Jackson at running back.
And would have set them up forever.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely. Jeff, you've written some other books, and I want to not just get away from the Bo book, because that's what we're promoting, but
I'm happy to.
Walter Payton, the 86 Mets, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, the Showtime Lakers, and I know there's others, I think Brett Favre, among some others. You've picked some guys that have not always been the most popular. Bo Jackson's incredibly popular. You've picked some other ones that are, people who don't like them, or there's a lot of angst about them. How much have you enjoyed that?
I mean, look, if someone wants to pay me to write a book about, like, I don't know, Willie Randolph, I'm happy to do it. But the reality is, like, people do enjoy reading about, like, there's something about iconic figures and iconic teams who had highs and lows and controversy and success. And, that's what sports history fascinates people in sports history. You could write, there are a million Donald Trump books and Barack Obama books on the market. There aren't many books out there about their Secretary of States. All right. There's a reason for that. People like the splashy, and Bo Jackson, to me, just like the Lakers, just like Favre, he's consequential. He means more. He wasn't just a second baseman for the Kansas City Royals. He was an iconic figure. And I do gravitate toward those types of people.
So Winning Time is now an HBO show, which I'm sure as a writer is an entirely new joy to see your work adapted. Jerry West was very upset with his portrayal on the show, which I would say the first episode, might be mad if I was Jerry West, but the way that Jerry West kind of ends up in the show, which is adapted to make an HBO show and not necessarily 100% down the line of what you wrote, I thought he came out pretty well. Have you talked to Jerry West? Is he still mad about that? I thought it was kind of strange that he was upset after episode 1, but didn't want to wait until episode 6, 7. He kind of starts to turn and grow as a character.
I agree. I haven't I'm not friends with Jerry West. Yeah. I've written about him a bunch, but he's not like my buddy where I have him on speed dial. To be totally honest, number one, I always say, I 100% get when people do not like portrayals of themselves. Like, I get it. We all see ourselves a certain way. And also, like, you're Jerry West, you're watching HBO. Here's this guy playing me. Like, that's weird. You know, that has to be weird. Like, there's no Jeff Pearlman character on TV. Maybe I'd feel the same way. But having written about Jerry West a lot, also having read his autobiography, which, by the way, is one of the best sports autobiographies ever, West by West, I thought it was a pretty fair portrayal. He was manic. He couldn't watch his team play. He was full of rage and anxiety, you know? So I get how it's weird. I understand if someone doesn't like it, but I loved Jason Clarke as Jerry West. I really did. So he can feel how he wants. He has every right to. That's nothing against him. I don't share that take.
You know, by the way, a good friend of mine, Eric Horton, is a great friend of mine. He's from Bessemer, Alabama, and I just sent him a text that he has to go read the book too, because he's from there, and he used to talk about Bo Jackson. He's about my age, though. As far as Bo as a dual sport guy, and we know he was eventually knocked down because of the hip injury, would you take Bo or Dion? And I know there's some older ones like Jim Thorpe, among others, who were dual sport guys. Two different type personalities, but your thoughts about those two?
I mean, longevity-wise, I would take Dion, obviously. Bo is a far superior baseball player to Deion Sanders. Far superior, not even in the same stratosphere. Football-wise, if Bo had played a full career, he would, you know, in the same way Dion is a legendary NFL player, Bo would have been a legendary NFL player. I'd say they're equals as far as football. One was obviously a defensive back, one was a running back. But baseball, Bo is so far superior. And also track and field, Bo is so far superior. So overall, I am going with Bo, but that's no slight on Dion. He's one of the greats of all time.
You know, Smoak, you just mentioned Jim Thorpe. And when I was a kid, we learned about Jim Thorpe in a history book.
Yep.
And Bo Jackson, we won't get that with Bo Jackson because, I mean, but really based on the same standards of the 1980s and what Bo Jackson meant to not only sports, but business. I mean, the guy had a freaking cartoon with Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky, for crying out loud. Like, this is a dude that should be, you know, you should maybe at least mention when you talk about, you know, world-changing athletes.
Oh, I 100% agree. And look, Jim Thorpe, also Native American, a really fascinating background that deserves everything. And David Marinus has a great book out now about Jim Thorpe that's wonderful and worth reading. It bothers me that, like, my kids would not know Bo Jackson except that they have a dad who wrote a book about Bo Jackson. And most kids, people coming up now, if you were to say to a modern sports fan, who's the greatest athlete? They'd be like LeBron James, you know, or maybe they'd say Michael Phelps, or maybe they'd say Michael Jordan because they own Air Jordans and they've heard enough. But no one under the age of 30 would name Bo Jackson, and they'd all be wrong. He is the greatest athlete of all time. There isn't even that much debate. He was faster than the fastest. He was stronger than the strongest. When he was in the NFL for those brief periods of time, he was the best running back. When he was in baseball, he was one of the best baseball players. Could have been an Olympic runner. He just simply is the best athlete who ever lived. And I think that's enough that you should be, at least in sports history, aware of his existence.
Harper Collins, again, the folk hero, the life and myth of Bo Jackson. Would you mind, Jeff, sharing? I love the story about draft night, where now everything's about, you know, people and got these cameras that you can see them no matter where they are, whatever round it might be. They can talk to them immediately because of how we're talking with you on Zoom or whatever. And Bo Jackson didn't know until when that he was actually drafted?
I think you're talking about the Royals. I think it was 2 or 3 days later. He was on vacation, and he's back on campus at Auburn. And some student is like, "Hey, did you hear you were drafted by the Royals?" And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know." And then he called his agent. Like, he literally didn't know. His whole existence is kind of like that. For someone who you would think would be so impressed by his own exploits, never seemed that impressed by his own exploits. And like, "Oh, I'm drafted. All right, that's cool. Oh, I'll go to Kansas City. That's cool. I just ran for 91 yards on Monday Night Football on a single run down the sideline. Oh, that's cool." He just was never. And what's neat about him is nowadays you'll never see Bo Jackson ripping Derrick Henry, and you'll never see him watching the Royals and saying, "These guys stink. They should do it like we did it." He's not that guy. He's unimpressed.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of, like, he does bike rides. I know he's a big time hunter now. What is Bo Jackson now in 2022 for people who haven't, you know, tried to follow him? And he's not, you know, out there, you know, talking about the good old days. People like you have to go and find him and talk about the good old days.
Well, first of all, he paid for a lot of the funerals for the Uvalde families, the victims of the Uvalde family, which speaks to his character, obviously. Does a charity bike race, as you said, Bo Bikes Mama. He has a lot of companies in food distribution, food processing. He dabbled a little in acting. Every year he'll show up either as a spring training instructor for the Royals or the White Sox. He pops up on an occasional sports talk show. He was on with Rich Eisen the other day. But mostly he lives in suburban Chicago. He's a dad of 3. He's a grandpa. He's been married to his wife, Linda, for almost 40 years. He shovels his own driveway. He drives his own Ford truck. He's kind of the everyman. He just decided once he got hurt, okay, I'm moving on. And he moved on.
How much did he spend time and cooperate when you were writing about this?
Almost none. He, early on when I decided I wanted to write about this, I sent him a letter and a couple of my books. He called me a few days later. We talked for a half hour-ish. He was very, very nice. And he basically said, I don't mind you doing a book about me, but I have no interest in talking about this stuff. I don't want to do it. I've been approached before, blah, blah, blah. And I got actually really lucky because in 1990, he came out with an autobiography, Bo Knows Bo, which was really good. It was written by Dick Schaap, the late journalist. And before he died, Dick Schaap donated all his notes and all the audio transcripts to the Auburn University Library. I didn't even know this existed. And I paid $250 and had them all sent to me. And it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of 28-year-old Bo Jackson talking about everything. Most of it never made the book. So I ended up with this access to Bo Jackson in the prime of his life, talking about everything. So I sometimes you get lucky in this business.
Hey, no, but that's luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and you found out about it and took advantage of that as well. Jeff Pearlman, is there one book you've written that you like more than any others?
This one's very high up there. I wrote a book about the United States Football League, which was the alternative league to the NFL from 83 to 85. That was a book that everyone said you shouldn't do. No one's going to buy it. It's not. Nobody cares. But it had so many amazing characters in it, including Donald Trump as owner of the New Jersey Generals, Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie, Sam Mills. And I wrote it, and it made the New York Times list. And I just really felt good about that because everyone told me not to write it. Oh, I really wanted to.
Football for a Buck is one of my favorites, Jeff. I loved it. We have a friend you interviewed in it, Mark Addix, who's a Baylor guy. Yeah, Mark Addix. He's a Baylor guy, so we know him really well. He was in the book, as many other people we've kind of come across. Anytime we have somebody that was in that book, I will ask him about that book on the show because I love that book. I've read it twice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a great book.
You've read it two more times than my mother. So I wish I were joking. I'm not joking about it.
Jeff, is writing a book, sometimes however long it takes, is it almost like preparing to run in a marathon where after that you're gassed and you just need to take a break, or do you just get right back into something else?
Okay, so I have run a lot of marathons, actually. Before I hurt my back, I was a runner. And I would say there are some definite similarities. The biggest one is this, like you get to mile 18 of a marathon, which is obviously 26 miles, and you tell yourself, if I finish this alive, I'm never going to do this again. Right? Every marathon you do, you hit the wall, you hit the wall, never going to do this again. And I remember finishing a New York marathon and it was pouring rain and I'm walking through this, line afterwards to get my food. And I was like, if God could strike me down right now, I would take it. I am in such pain. I'm miserable. Take me. I feel that way after every book is done. I'm like, this was so hard. It took so long. But also like a marathon, 2 days later, I'm like, okay, what's the next marathon I can run? So it's sort of like that. You get addicted to it. You get really into it. It's painful. It's long. It's arduous. But then you want to do it again.
Jeff, thank you very much. Great book. Again, the book is The Last Folk Hero, The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson, HarperCollins, available pretty much everywhere. It's also on SI.com, a story about the Buccaneers screwing that up, that they could have had Steve Young and also Bo Jackson. Thank you, Jeff. Have a great week.
All right, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. New York Times bestseller, Jeff Pearlman. Paul, great stuff in getting him lined up.
I'm a big fan of his work.